I chose the research topic of children with cerebral palsy, as children with a disability is an area I am passionate about and also very interested in finding more about. After reviewing the literature, I chose to focus on hand splints as an intervention to improve hand function in cerebral palsy children. So basically, cerebral palsy is a broad term that refers to a group of disorders that affect the individual's ability to move. It is usually caused by an underdevelopment or damage to the brain, either before or shortly after birth. It is a permanent, lifelong condition, but does not usually progress throughout an individual's life. It affects all individuals differently and can have effects on body movements, posture control, balance, muscle control, and reflexes. And it can also affect cognitive and sensory processes. Occupational therapists are strongly involved in the development and application of interventions to assist children with cerebral palsy to participate in daily occupations that they want to do, need to do, are expected to do, and that gives their lives meaning. Hand splints are commonly used by occupational therapists to assist to participate in meaningful occupations. According to Jackman and others, a hand splint may be a brace, an orthosis, a cast, tape, or any external device which is applied to one or more of the joints of the upper arm. So after I chose my research topic of children with cerebral palsy, I did a search of the literature using very broad search terms. These were children, cerebral palsy, interventions, and occupational therapy. After I chose my systematic review, which was titled The Effectiveness of Hand Splints in Children with Cerebral Palsy, a systematic review with meta-analysis, I then used narrower search terms to find the randomised controlled trials. These terms were hand splints, children, and cerebral palsy. I searched multiple databases to find these articles. These databases included the Cochrane Library, Medline, PubMed, CINAHL+, Web of Science, Academic Search Complete, and I also did a general search on the You Can Find toolbar on the UC Library website, which searches all UC databases. For the levels of evidence, when I searched the broad terms, I found 2 systematic reviews on interventions in children with cerebral palsy. I chose the article on hand splints as it appealed to me, and I found this to be quite an interesting topic. I then searched for the next level of available evidence, which is a randomised control trial, which is a level 2 of evidence on the NHMRC evidence hierarchy table. I found one RCT quite easily, which was from 2011. I did, however, struggle to find the other one. Some of the barriers were, one article I found had an abstract in English, however the article itself was in Turkish. Another article from 2009 is no longer available to be viewed, and I couldn't find any other available RCTs, so therefore I went to the next level of available evidence, which was a pseudo-randomised control trial. So for this level of evidence, I found 3 available studies and chose the most recent one to evaluate for the assessment. While conducting my study, I found there were multiple cohort and case series studies published in this area, but I did not investigate these any further. The quality of the systematic review was sound. The search strategy showed several medical and health databases were searched for articles. There was a comprehensive list of search terms, and this was used to identify potential studies. The review also stated that the reference lists of all studies originally identified from the initial search were then used to identify further studies that may be included. Both the inclusion and exclusion criteria was clearly outlined in the methods section of the paper. The conclusions drawn from the study were clearly stated, and there was also a highlighted box at the start of the study that summarise the key findings. Appropriate figures and tables were also referred to in the results section, and these were used to support the findings. The study clearly stated the limitations of the present study, the implications for therapists working with children with cerebral palsy in regards to hand splints as an intervention, and it also suggested areas for future research. The Pedro scale was used to evaluate the two secondary pieces of evidence. The randomised control trial scored 6 out of 10 on the Pedro scale, as I answered no to number 4. It was difficult to tell if the control or the intervention groups had similar baseline characteristics. There was also no blinding of the subjects or of the therapists who were administering the treatment, and this was due to the nature of the study. And the intention to treat, whether all subjects were allocated to the control or the intervention group, or listed as the intention to treat, this was unclear. In the second study, the pseudo-randomised controls trial, it scored 8 out of 10 on the Pedro scale. This was because the subjects and therapists were not blinded, but overall this appeared to be quite a valid study. The main sources of bias I determined for reviewing this research was that the subjects were not blinded to the treatment they received, and the therapists were not blinded to the treatment they were administering. Admittedly, this was hard given the experimental design of the studies. However, this could lead to bias, for example, by the subjects or the parent subjects saying what they believe the therapist or the assessor wants to hear. All these studies had small sample sizes, which means a certain result, whether it be large or small, may not be large or small enough to be an outlier, but it may still skew the data. And in all studies, there was no mention of a script or a set procedure for the assessor to follow. In particular, when there are multiple assessors, the children could be told slightly different things, which may affect the way they perform certain tasks. So the main outcomes to come out of reviewing research in this area is that hand splints may provide improvements in hand function. The effects of the splint wear appear to be lost shortly after the splint is removed. Hand splints are most effective when combined with another type of intervention, and further research is needed in this area with larger sample sizes to support the evidence that has already been presented. So the main things I learnt from reviewing this literature was how many different types of hand splints are available. I guess I'd always considered hand splints to be either a fiberglass cast or a stiff material support. I also learnt more about cerebral palsy and the different types of conditions there are, as well as the impacts these can have on people's daily lives. The literature also describes some assessments for assessing the impairment or measuring improvements for people with cerebral palsy that I had not heard about before, and I found this very interesting. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Please see on this slide the references I alluded to throughout the presentation, and these are the key references for my assignment. As you also note, all photographs that have been shown through this presentation I sourced off Flickr, which is an open access photo library, and these photos have been given permission to be shared or downloaded.